The White House has asked Spotify to censor Joe Rogan for putting out misinformation. I think it's time for Joe Rogan to ask the White House to censor the CDC for publishing articles in MMWR that are not fit for the scientific record. The latest example, they got a new study out there, the effectiveness of face mask or respirator use in California, and it is a case-controlled test-negative design, and it claims that cloth masks are really good, surgical masks are even better, and the N95s are amazing and on par with vaccination. Some people even say they're as effective as vaccination. Oh boy, I wouldn't say that. I think vaccination is more effective. So, what does this paper have to do with anything? Well, it is a test-negative design. So what happened? They looked in California and they saw all the people who went to get a molecular test, like a PCR test. And they basically said all these people are positive and all these people are negative. And they tell those people. And then 2 days after they tell those people, they call up all the positive people, and 13% of them answer the phone. 87% of them did the honorable thing, which is they're probably too sick to answer the phone, or they ignore a caller that they don't know, which is what I would do. And then in the group of people that tested negative, about 8% of them answered the phone. And they asked them a series of questions like, hey, did you recently spend time in an indoor public space like a mall or a grocery store? Hey, did you wear a mask? How well did you wear the mask? All of the time, none of the time, some of the time, the usual business. Later on in the survey, they started saying, hey, maybe we want to learn what type of mask they're wearing. So they asked about cloth masks and surgical masks and N95 or respirators. Okay. And then what they do is they compare. Who are these people? Well, the first thing they find is that they have a few differences between them. The people who tested positive, they're much less likely to be vaccinated, of course. The people who tested negative are much more likely to be fully vaccinated, okay? They also found that the reason they were getting tested is very, very different. The people who were testing positive, the reason they got tested was they felt like they had COVID, mostly 77%. The people who tested negative, the reason they went to get tested was because... just cuz was actually one example. 14% was just cuz. Some percent was that my company requires it. They've been bamboozled by some testing company and I got to do it. And other people thought they might have felt something, but they weren't for sure. But, there's a big difference in the reason why they went. And what did they found? They found in this case control design that the odds that you had been wearing the mask religiously and tested negative, you were more likely to be wearing the mask religiously if you tested negative versus if you were wearing the mask religiously and testing positive. That's what they found. So what are the problems with this thing? Well, one, I think we need to reflect on why do we even use test negative design? I mean, the idea of test negative design is people are all coming in for the same reason. They feel sick, like they have a cold. Some of that cold is due to influenza. Some is due to other viruses. And then the ones that test positive for influenza, we try to figure out if they got the influenza vaccine. The ones that tested negative for influenza, we try to figure out if they got the influenza vaccine, and we can kind of infer what does the influenza vaccine do, because it's supposed to lower the rate of influenza, but it's not going to have anything to do with rhinovirus, all those other viruses. So that's kind of a useful setting to use a test negative design. This setting's a little bit odd because the idea is that the people who tested positive and tested negative, they were both the same kinds of people seeking out testing for the same reason. But that assumption is immediately violated. The people testing negative are seeking out testing for totally different reasons. They're pre-travel testing, pre-procedure testing, just cause, routine screening because of work. That's very different than I feel really sick. And you can imagine now you have created a bias. The people who work at places that have so much cash that they can afford to keep testing their employees are different than people who are working jobs and working in places where the only time they go get tested is when they're really feeling sick. Their behavior may be different. People who are the kinds of people that get tested for COVID just cause might be pretty worried about COVID just cause, and they might be doing a whole bunch of different things to avoid COVID, not just wearing the mask. And I imagine that if we weren't talking about masks, imagine we were talking about carrying a Fauci pendant, wearing a Fauci pendant. You can imagine that if you went on TV for many, many months and you said the only way to avoid coronavirus that you can do is wear a Fauci pendant. Fauci pendants ward off coronavirus. And then, of course, what will happen? Rich, well-connected, elite people will start wearing the Fauci pendants. And then when you walk past them on the street, they'll show you their Fauci pendant. No, stay away, and then people who are working blue-collar jobs, essential workers, people who are in red states, they might be less likely to wear the Fauci pendant. And they may also be more likely to fraternize with other people and go to bars and restaurants and be less lax with other things. And they're going to be more likely to get COVID. And then lo and behold, you do this kind of design, you might even find that the Fauci pendant actually works. It works. It wards off the virus. But of course, Fauci pendants don't ward off viruses. Pendants don't work. What you're finding is the pendant is a symbol for other patterns of behavior, et cetera, and the types of people who would wear such a pendant. And that's what they're doing in this study. That's really the crux of it. That's the biggest flaw. It's a test negative design, quote unquote, but it's fundamentally two different groups of people. You see that in everything from their vaccination record to their reason for getting tested to a whole bunch of covariates. And even though they're matching them for age and sex, that's not enough to overcome the massive residual confounding that this study has. But of course, the CDC doesn't get stopped by that pesky thing called accurate science. They go ahead and tweet out their infographic. Their infographic, I initially said it kind of lied because it shows these arrows dropping. Maybe I'll put it up on the screen. It shows these arrows dropping, and it makes it look like cloth masks are great, surgical masks are better, respirators are even better. The problem with it is there's an asterisk next to cloth masking saying did not meet statistical significance or something like that. Ridiculous. Come on. Come on. I don't even know what to say. This is propaganda, not science. Okay. Point number one was the point I mentioned. Different people are getting tested for different reasons. Number two, the response rate is poor. You're only getting 13% of test positive people answering the phone and participating in your survey. And I just can't imagine the type of bias that's inserting because of if you're so sick, you go seek out a COVID test, you get your COVID test result. You can imagine that you're already kind of feeling crummy when you get the test result. And then, I haven't had COVID, but many people, of course, many people have had COVID. And I've talked to many people, and many people feel worse in those few days after they get the test result because they're falling into the crater of the disease. And so then somebody calls you 2 days later to ask you a series of silly questions. I just can't imagine you want to participate in that if you're feeling really sick. So you're selecting suddenly for the people who tested positive but felt sick enough to get tested for symptoms but not that sick, who are still willing to participate. I mean, you're introducing all sorts of biases. It's not even an accurate survey of the people who tested positive. Similarly, I don't know what kind of person goes in to get tested just cause. I've never gotten tested just cause. And then to follow up and get a phone call and answer a series of questions, that's a unique person too. And so you might be enriching for, on that side, the most worried people, the most concerned people, the most anxious people. The study, well, I'll come to the next point. Number three, it's all self-reported. You can imagine that if you tell somebody, you drop the hammer on them and you say, you have COVID-19. Now, then 2 days, you let them marinate with that. Let me ask you, buddy, you wear your mask like you're supposed to? Of course, then they say, well, you know what, maybe I wasn't so good about it because I know it's got to help. That's what everyone tells me. And I got COVID, so maybe I slipped up. But now you ask that to the person who you had told they were negative, they might say, you know what, on balance, I probably did wear it, So they're answering the question after you've told them they have COVID, and they've been trained to think that masking keeps COVID at bay. So naturally, that will insert a huge bias in their recall of what happened. It's a catastrophic bias. Why is this study designed this way? There's more. I'm sorry. The effect size, number 4. Effect size is implausibly large. They say surgical masks have a odds ratio of a 0.4 or something, a 66% reduction in risk. In the randomized trial in Bangladesh, which is riddled with problems, which I've talked about elsewhere, it was 11%. That's the randomized efficacy, 11%. You got 66%. Come on. It's not that good. Come on. And if it was that good, we ran a randomized trial of surgical masks that asked if they were good enough to protect you by 50%. It's called Dan Mask, and that study was negative. But critics of that study say it didn't have the sample size to find a more plausible difference. It was powered for a 50% difference, and we all know masks don't lower at 50%. This is 66%, people. So if you believe this, you got to conclude Dan Mask was adequately powered, and ergo ruled out this effect size. Both things can't be true, okay? You have a contradiction. And by the way, Dan Mask is probably right, and this is probably wrong, because one is a randomized study, and one is, I don't even want to give it a label because I'm going to not be kind. Number 5, this is protection of the individual. Oh, all this time we've been chatting about masking. Everyone says that, I wear my mask to protect you and you wear yours to protect me. And mine doesn't protect me, of course not. And yours doesn't protect you, but I protect you and vice versa. Okay. But this study is looking at the individual benefit. And if the mask is so protective for you individually, you don't need me to participate in this. You want to wear it, you wear it. You wear your N95, you're vaccinated, you're going to be doing very well. The effect size here is massive. I could be coughing COVID everywhere. Your mask is so good. There's a contradiction there, which is that you want others to wear it, but this is really a study of individual benefit. That's the contradiction. Number 6, Wes Pegden, the mathematician. By the way, Wes is just a smart guy. He's not an ideologue. He's somebody who approaches things like a mathematician would, with a scientific mind and clear first principles. And he points out the CDC ran a very, very similar study back in 2020. I put the link in my Substack, and it was totally negative, but of course, no one talks about that. Number 7, analytical flexibility. I mean, they're looking at people who they had COVID, but not just had COVID, they had to have remembered being in a public space the 14 days before. And they also couldn't have known somebody who had COVID. Why is that again? But the authors of this paper are slicing and dicing the data in this way, adding these extra inclusion criteria. Why not take those both away? Why not add a different one? Why not ask if you have ask this just in the group of people who were exposed to someone with COVID in the last 14 days? Then you can already see they have many degrees of analytical flexibility. How many different ways can this data set be probed and asked, not just by this group, but by many other groups? And selectively results are presented. And the moment you get multiple people asking the question over and over again, the credibility of science plummets. And actually, the person who's done the best work on that is John Ioannidis in a series of papers from The Vibration of Effects with Chirag Patel, papers on in JAMA, the potential importance of observational studies that do not exist. Brilliant papers by John looking at, you give give a data set with a lot of variables, you give them infinite time, or you have many, many groups investigate, you will get all sorts of point estimates. And I guess the other person who did work on that is Brian Nozick, looking at soccer cards. I'll explain a little aside. Very clever paper. He's got a data set of how often soccer players got a red card or a yellow card, penalty cards. It also has, I believe, some coding as to the soccer player's skin tone. And he asks different people to say, can you find racial bias here? Are darker skinned players more likely to get red cards than lighter skinned players? And he gives it to like 25 teams in this famous paper. And some teams find that, yes, there's racial bias. Other teams find there is no racial bias. I think one team actually found that there's racial bias against lighter skinned people. But the range of effects was all over the place. You could get whatever you wanted to get. And the point there was that by giving people a set of variables that are all coded, but just giving them analytical flexibility, they can come up with a range of plausible responses. You couple that with a strong incentive, an incentive at the CDC to give you what you want to hear, and you're going to get not science truth, but you're going to get science propaganda at the end of it. You're going to get something that's an opinion poll, a self-fulfilling prophecy. It'll tell you what you want to hear. And I worry that that happened here. Since I wrote my piece, very smart person, ID doctor from abroad, emailed me, said, liked your piece, 2 more things, VP, 2 more things to add to your pile. Number 1, it's really odd that they excluded people who had a known SARS-CoV-2 contact. If anything, you would have wanted to include them because you want to know if the mask protected you when you actually encountered the virus. So why do they do that again? Quote, wouldn't it make more sense to have this type of study after a positive contact, end quote? Seems like an odd analytical choice. It makes you think that there's some data play going on here. Number 9, this person said the difference in vaccination rates, they weren't just a little bit, they were profound. 78% of people who tested positive were unvaccinated or incompletely vaccinated, and 57% of people who tested negative were unvaccinated. And the fully vaccinated was 17 versus 32. That's a huge difference. And he also points out, this wise person, that fully vaccinated means different things. It was technically 1 J&J or maybe 2 or 3 mRNA. That's what fully vaccinated meant for a large part of this study. So now you're comparing people, a type of person who would get three slugs of Moderna in the arm and go test negative just cause, versus somebody who got 1 of J&J and is coughing up a lung. I mean, those are very different types of people, and their behavior may be very different, as well as the fact that you may be unearthing differences in the vaccine preferences. 1 J&J is, not as good at protecting from symptomatic SARS-CoV-2 as 3 mRNA. I don't think many people will quibble with that, and that might be part of the effect you're detecting here. So these were brilliant points. This person found 2 more than me. I always admire, I have to say, I always admire someone who finds the thing you didn't find. In fact, it's one of the great pleasures of science, to read a paper and think you're reading it well. And there are a few people over the years who always impress me when they find things that I didn't find. And especially when they find something that I really wish I had found, or I ought to have found. Then I'm like, got to practice. Got to hit the gym, the intellectual gym, the science gym. It's a different gym. It's a sad gym. It's a sad gym that involves you reading articles late at night. It's a gym that nobody wants to go to. Nobody tweets selfies from this gym. Okay. Those are my thoughts on the paper itself, which is, I think, in shambles. It doesn't prove anything that it claims to prove. But now let me talk about the second thing I wanted to tell you about, which is that who are the types of people that push this? The CDC pushes it. The MMWR pushes it. That's not good for science. What does it do? I mean, there are lots of people who are mask skeptics. There are a lot of people who are mask believers. Believers don't need this to believe. They believe. After all, they're wearing the Fauci pendant. They believe. And the skeptics are not going to be persuaded by something that just doesn't have the methodologic rigor to persuade them. They're going to say all the things I said and then some. And what's the net result? The net result is that we just trust the CDC less. I mean, this is death by 1,000 cuts. They're doing it to themselves. People say, what is Joe Rogan doing for science? It's not Joe Rogan. It's the New York Times. It's WAPO. WAPO covered this uncritically. It's the CDC itself. They're publishing this. They're promoting this. It's a self-inflicted wound. I will not take you seriously if you promote papers like this. My new baseline instinct is when I see their paper is to immediately enter it skeptical. I didn't have that pre-pandemic. They gave that to me. I was a fan of them pre-pandemic. I didn't know much about it. It wasn't my favorite journal to read, but I was a fan. They took that away from me. My pretest probability is that what they're publishing is not true. I have less credibility in them. I really doubt them. That's not good. That's me. I'm a scientist. It's true for a lot of people. They're killing their credibility. And you kill your credibility in this political environment and you push on issues that are politically charged, I worry what's going to happen to you. I mean, somebody is going to come into power someday and they may even successfully run on a slogan of, demolish the CDC or dismantle it or break it apart. You don't want to contribute to the study that led to your own dismantling, I would think. The next thing is, there are smart people in the academy. There are many smart people. There's this smart person who found 2 things more than me. He's a smart person. There are lots of smart people. Smart people on this issue, they're pushing this study in their Twitter feeds. That's not good. I mean, it's really not good for them. It's not good for me. It's not good for anybody. There are a few of us who are in contact with each other, who are academics in different universities. And when we see that, we lose a lot of respect for senior people when they push things that are known to be flawed. We also no longer come to trust them either. Don't trust them to be impartial. Don't trust them to be a fair justice of this. That's a problem. That's really a problem. And it really suggests that science at the highest levels of leadership is not science, it's politics. And they're tweeting it because it's the politically expedient thing to do. It's scientifically just doesn't have anything there. There's no there. It is flawed, irredeemably flawed. It ought not be pushed from a science point of view. The last point, I really do think people think, I've gotten a little bit of pushback, but people don't quite see it yet. Science is a delicate bird. It has to be apolitical for it to have credibility. It runs the risk right now. This perturbation has been so large, it can easily fragment and enter a death spiral. The death spiral will lead to 2 things. There will be 2 political parties. Each political party will have its own science. It'll have its own scientists, a set of scientists that say that thing. And they will provide studies that support that thing. There may just be a few scientists left who are, quote, truth seekers, but they will be, I think, excluded. People who don't fit neatly into any tribe actually are demonized by both tribes and not included. And so I don't think they're going to do so well. And if you run that risk, if science really splits in this way, I think you are not going to do well going forward. I think you may end into more and more spiraling, more polarization, and even sort of catastrophic pressure placed on the system. That's why I was quick to point out in my last video that although I am skeptical that lockdowns serve much good, I'm also not convinced that that study that came out of Hopkins was enough to persuade me that they didn't work at all. I think you're going to need a lot more studies, better studies, not meta-analyses of bad studies, but, good studies. And I think you're going to need longer time horizons to really see the impact of lockdown. And I do think that, like lots of things in biomedicine and public health, there are probably some rare circumstances where it was beneficial. The problem is we abused it widely, and we used it so broadly. So like bloodletting, it worked for hemochromatosis, but we used it for every single medical ailment, and that's probably mostly wrong. And I think that's what we're going to end up with. But we need to sort of be pursuing the truth on that issue. So overall thoughts, CDC, it's just not good. I don't know what you're doing. I don't even know. I mean, do you want people to trust you? Do you want to exist in 20 years? You're happy not having an agency, CDC? You want it to be dismantled by people who are put off by this? Do you want scientists to abandon you, to think less of you? Is that what you want? I mean, I don't know. I mean, what am I to think when you publish things like this that It's not even a very sophisticated. Let me put this as this point. One of the reasons I really like my day job, medical oncology, is that the ways in which the trials are often gamed are incredibly sophisticated, not apparent to a lot of people. There are randomized control trials that appear from first glance to be very well done. If you go on this channel, you can go back and listen to Polo trial and some other examples I've given. But deep in the trial, there are some kernels of bias. This is just nakedly biased. It's overtly biased. You don't need a lot of training in epidemiology to see all the problems with this study. When you push this, you don't just publish it. You're pushing this narrative really hard. You're getting uncritical media coverage. Every single person touching this is losing credibility. It is really poisonous to touch this study and to say it's good. You've lost your credibility. There's a group of people, I think, on Twitter who believe they're doing good, promoting things like this. It's a problem because I just don't think that they are equipped with the tools to critically appraise literature. When they criticize articles that I'm critical of, like ivermectin, vitamin D kind of studies, half the time they criticize it. The thing they're criticizing is like, that's not the problem in the study. It's actually like a different problem. Like, it's not a good study. I agree with you. I don't want to split hairs, but that's not the reason why it's not a good study. You gotta actually know what you're talking about when you're looking at these studies to build your own worldview. And if you don't, you're going to build a flawed worldview, which is what I see widely. The CDC is doing serious damage. The people pushing this are doing serious damage to their reputations. We're also in a unique moment in time where it's very difficult for people to criticize this analysis. I think there are a lot of people who will agree with me 100% or read my Substack and say, oh, that hurts. They're going to see it. They're going to see the logic of it. But they don't want to comment on it, obviously, because it's a really charged time. But they're not going to forget. They're going to remember 3 years from now that doctor, that expert, that person, all they do is tweet garbage papers. And so when there's a new study of, I don't know, some pump to pump blood around your body when you have cardiac dysfunction made by some company that's lucrative, and this person said, oh, interesting study. They're going to say, I'm sure it is interesting. Let me take a close look at that. Or when there's some paper in Nature that makes some very provocative sociopolitical claim and on health, they're going to say, okay, yeah, I'm sure that's true. They're going to be skeptical of these people, and I think that will seriously erode their reputation, but also kind of leads to another kind of bitter pill, which is that the more scientists come to believe that the people who've risen to the top, the best positions in academia, are not good at the task of the academy, critically appraisal, the more they will feel cheated by the system. It's a political system. It's not a system of merit or integrity or principles or truth. And I think that will lead to a lot of problems. And then I think the science may just split in half. I mean, if it splits, it's gonna be bad. It's gonna be on every topic you can ever think of. I mean, it's gonna be many, many different topics where we're gonna get these seismic splits, and it will be preyed upon by for-profit entities. They'll come in and figure out ways that they can make money from, like we've seen COVID selling tests that are not necessary, but like we saw for, tens of years before, tens of years, 20, 30, 40 years, where companies, drug and device companies, sell things that just don't work, and then they prey upon these kinds of structural failures in science. It's not going to be good. It's going to be really bad. This is emblematic. Last thing I'd say, when you see something bad like this, even if you love masks, don't tweet it. Just let it go. Just let it slide. Just say you love masks and there's other reasons you love masks. Even cite that Bangladesh study at me because that's, better. It has problems, but it's better. Just don't cite this. Just don't cite this. Okay. So what you get on this channel, data analysis like this, thoughts on science broadly. If you like this video, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, comment, leave a message down below. Somebody was recently mocking me for always saying that. I don't know why people say that, but I think we're supposed to say that. Like, subscribe, comment, leave a message below. Supposedly hitting that bell is good. I don't know. And until next time.